So what's our moral duty to the natural world? I mean, really think about that for a second. That's the core question behind something called environmental ethics. It's a field that honestly challenges us to look at everything we do, from the tiny choices we make every day to the huge policies we create, and ask how it all impacts the planet and, well, everything living on it.
Okay, let's start with a scenario. Just picture this. A massive typhoon slams into your community. Homes are gone. The devastation is just overwhelming. Now, it's super easy to just label that a natural disaster and move on, right? But what if it's more than that? What if it's a direct consequence of something bigger? Something connected to a much deeper question about how we're all living on this planet.
And that, right there, brings us to the heart of the matter. What is our moral responsibility to the environment? I'm not just talking about cleaning up after a catastrophe. I'm talking about the choices we make before it ever happens. The things that could maybe, just maybe, prevent it in the first place.
So, to even begin to answer that, we've got to look at a few different ways of thinking, a few ethical frameworks. And we're going to start with the most traditional one, the view that's pretty much dominated Western thought for, well, centuries.
This view is called anthropocentrism. And, the name kind of says it all. Anthro means human. At its core, it's the belief that only human beings have what's called intrinsic value, value just for being what they are. Everything else, animals, plants, rivers, mountains, they only have value because of what they can do for us. Their worth is purely instrumental. It's all about their usefulness to humanity. And look, this is not some newfangled idea. It's deeply, deeply rooted in our history. You've got thinkers like Aristotle who literally said nature has made all things specifically for the sake of man. And that one idea, that the entire non-human world is just a big resource for us to use, has had a massive impact on how our modern world is built.
But okay, what happens when we start to push back on that? When we question that human-centered view and start expanding our circle of who or what counts morally? This, my friends, is where environmental ethics gets really, really interesting.
All right, so the first step outside that purely human-focused bubble is called sentientism. This framework basically says, hey, the thing that gives you moral status isn't how smart you are, it's not whether you can reason. The real key is sentience, the ability to feel pleasure and, maybe most importantly, to feel pain and to suffer.
And this is such a great way to see that shift in thinking. The philosopher Jeremy Bentham just completely reframed the whole debate with one simple but powerful question. He basically said, if a being can suffer, then its suffering has to matter morally. Full stop. And that just flips the whole thing on its head, right? It moves the focus from intelligence over to experience.
Okay, so let's push that circle out even further. The next step is biocentrism, which pretty much means life-centered. This perspective says, hold on, it's not just about suffering. All living things have intrinsic value simply because they are alive. We're not just talking about humans or animals that can feel pain anymore. Nope. This view extends moral consideration to every single living thing. Yeah, that includes plants.
Albert Schweitzer really captured the heart of this whole idea with his concept of reverence for life. He argued that real ethics, true ethics, only begins when we finally recognize that every single living thing has its own will to live, just like we do, and that this drive, this will, deserves our deepest respect, maybe even our awe. All right, so let's recap. We've gone from just humans to animals that can feel to all living things. But there's one more expansion. And it's a big one. It's pretty radical, actually. What if we stopped focusing on just individuals and started thinking about the entire system as a whole? And this right here just lays out the difference so clearly. On one side, you've got that old human-centered view, where we see ourselves as the conquerors of nature. But on the other side, you've got ecocentrism. And here, the entire ecosystem has value, and our role completely changes. We're not conquerors anymore. We're just plain members. Citizens of a much, much larger community.
So, ecocentrism argues that the whole is what has value. We're talking about the entire biotic community, and that includes the non-living parts too, like the soil, the water, the air. Individual creatures are valuable for sure, but their value is seen in relation to the health of the entire ecosystem they're a part of. It's a huge shift in perspective.
So then, the big question becomes, how are we supposed to act? Well, Alda Leopold, in his absolutely game-changing Land Ethic, give us this powerful guidepost. It's like a moral compass. He said our actions should be judged not by how they benefit us, but by how they impact the health and stability of the entire ecological system. It's that simple and that profound.
Okay. Phew. We've just walked through these expanding circles of care, but let's bring it back. How does any of this connect to that typhoon we talked about at the beginning? I mean, how do these big ideas actually translate into real-world action?
Well, here's the thing. Adopting one of these wider moral circles, whether it's life-centered or ecosystem-centered, it forces us to completely change our mindset. We have to shift from being reactive to being proactive. It means embracing what you could call preventive ethics. Our responsibility doesn't just kick in when the floodwaters are rising. No, it begins way, way before that, in the thousands of little choices we make every single day.
So what does that actually look like in practice? It really boils down to 3 key principles. First up, sustainability. That's all about making sure that what we do today doesn't screw over future generations. Second, there's justice. This one's about making sure the burdens of environmental damage, like pollution or toxic waste, don't always end up falling on the poorest and most marginalized communities. And third, intergenerational responsibility. This is a big one. It's about recognizing we have a real moral duty to the people who haven't even been born yet.
So you see, when we start talking about things like responsible urban planning, or protecting forests that act as natural storm barriers, or cutting the emissions that fuel these monster storms, we're not just talking about smart policy, it's more than that. From this wider ethical view, all of those actions are actually moral expressions. They are an expression of care for the entire community of life.
And this is so important, because it's not just some abstract philosophical exercise, right? This is about the very foundation of the world we are all building together. And that leaves us with a really critical question to chew on. What kind of moral world are we actually building through our relationship with nature?
And we can make that question even more personal. I mean, think about it. Can we honestly say we love our neighbor if we're neglecting the very earth that sustains them and us? It just draws this incredibly powerful line connecting our duty to each other directly to our duty to the planet.
Ultimately, that's the challenge of environmental ethics. It's a call to action. It's really an invitation to expand our moral imagination, to stretch that circle of care way beyond just our own species and way beyond just our own time.
Because when you get right down to it, this is what it's all about. It's about recognizing that these 2 acts of care, caring for the planet and caring for people, they aren't separate things. They never have been. They are one and the same. Caring for the planet is, in the truest sense, caring for each other. Thank you for joining me.